one nation is how the United States refers to itself, but in reality, this isn't correct. In fact, within the United States, there are 12 competing regions that have their own cultures, values, and priorities. And these regions really act more like independent nations under a single flag. So what are the 12 nations of America? The United States has long been viewed as a single nation, a union of states under one flag and one constitution. But beneath the surface lies something deeper. America isn't one nation, it's 12. I'm not the first person to notice this either. Journalist Colin Woodard originally proposed 11 American nations in his book, American Nations. But what I've done is expanded his nations to reflect two major changes: the inclusion of Hawaii as its own unique nation, and the creation of a Spanish Caribbean nation that includes both southern Florida and Puerto Rico, both areas that are distinct from the nearby regions. So with that said, let's get to the nations. If you were to look at a cultural map of the United States, you'd see something very different from the one you learned in school. Instead of state lines, you'd see 12 fluid, overlapping territories stretching across traditional borders and sometimes even national ones. But for this video, we're going to focus just on the nations within the United States, starting in the Northeast. Rooted in New England and stretching into upstate New York, Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Minnesota is the nation of Yankeedom. On a map, it hugs the northeastern part of the US and most of the Great Lakes. Centered around New York City and parts of northern New Jersey and the Hudson Valley is the nation of New Netherlands. Moving south in central Pennsylvania and heading westward across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and parts of Iowa and Missouri is the Midlands. Found along the Chesapeake Bay in eastern Virginia and parts of Maryland and North Carolina is the nation of Tidewater. It resembles the remnant of old colonies along the Atlantic. West of Tidewater is Greater Appalachia, a broad, rugged band that stretches from the hills of western Pennsylvania down through West Virginia, eastern Kentucky and Tennessee, into Arkansas and parts of Texas. Moving south once more and dominating much of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and parts of Louisiana and Texas is the Deep South. In the far south and consisting of southern Florida, especially Miami, and Puerto Rico, is the Spanish Caribbean nation. Tucked in between the Gulf of Mexico and the Deep South nation is the nation of New France. Moving westward, spanning from Southern California and Arizona across New Mexico and into West Texas is the nation of El Norte. North of El Norte and covering a vast swath of interior California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, parts of western Texas and the Dakotas, and much of mainland Alaska is the Far West nation. In the far north and west is the left coast, a narrow but powerful strip along the Pacific, stretching from the San Francisco Bay Area up through Portland and Seattle and into the Alaska archipelago. And finally, thousands of miles away from the mainland is the nation of Hawaii. These 12 nations have different politics, cultures, values, and social trends, and they don't follow state boundaries, which were often arbitrarily made at the time and didn't really factor in how actual cultures might develop. For this reason, the American nations expand beyond in ways that we're not really accustomed to. Which brings us to the geography and history of each nation. Before we dive deeper into the 12 nations of America, it's worth asking, how can we all live in the same country and yet see the world so differently? That's where today's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. Ground News is an app and website made by a former NASA engineer who saw how news outlets and social algorithms often feed false biases. Ground News counters that by gathering all of the world's news in one place, so you can see what's being reported on and how it's being reported across the political spectrum. Take this headline with 30 different sources. Walking faster may reduce the risk of abnormal heart rhythms. Sounds simple, right? What's wild is that even something as simple as walking can become regionally charged. In places like Yankeedom with denser walkable cities, it might be framed as common sense. In the Deep South, however, it's more of a lifestyle shift. Ground News helps me explore these coverage divides in real time and understand the bias baked into our national discourse, something that's never been more important in a country this culturally fractured. So if you're looking for a way to see through the politics of news reporting, go to groundnews.com/geobygeoff to get 40% off their Vantage plan for unlimited access. Remember to subscribe by using my link in the description or by scanning the QR code to get this discount for a limited time, so you can cut through the biases. Where people settled and how they came to shape the land are at the heart of how each nation came to be. The cultural lines that define these 12 nations don't align with modern state borders, because that's not how nations are actually formed. Look at Europe, for example. Each country looks organic rather than the artificial straight lines that make up the individual states. This is because they follow linguistic and cultural borders that were formed over hundreds of years. Because of this, each nation in the United States similarly grew from a distinct historic root, which was influenced by its surrounding landscape. Here's how the geography and history shaped each nation. Yankeedom emerged from the Puritan colonies of New England. Settlers arrived seeking a religious utopia and quickly organized around towns, churches, and schools. The geography, rocky soil, dense forests, and harsh winters wasn't ideal for large plantations, but perfect for close-knit, self-sufficient communities. This created a legacy of town halls, universities, and civic institutions that still defines the region today, even as far west as the state of Minnesota. Meanwhile, New Netherlands was originally founded by the Dutch as a commercial trading post and grew in the sheltered natural harbor around modern-day New York City. Because of its unique geography, New Netherlands encouraged maritime trade, immigration, and urban density. The Dutch legacy of religious tolerance, multiculturalism, and commerce remains central to its character today. And then there's the Midlands, with its rolling hills, fertile farmland, and navigable rivers. The Midlands were settled by English Quakers and German immigrants who envisioned a pluralistic, agrarian, middle-class society, primarily focused on the colony of Pennsylvania, but encompassing places as far west as Missouri and Iowa. Its geography lent itself to family farms, and its central location helped it evolve into the political swing region of the United States. Tidewater developed along the Chesapeake Bay and eastern North Carolina. Its wide, navigable rivers and access to the Atlantic made it ideal for plantation agriculture and transatlantic trade. This region was settled by English gentry, and its flat coastal plains supported a hierarchical society based on tobacco, enslavement, and exporting agriculture for wealth. The rugged Appalachian Mountains, of course, define Greater Appalachia. This nation is isolated and heavily forested in the east, but rich in natural resources. Originally settled by Scot-Irish frontiersmen, Greater Appalachia developed a fiercely independent culture shaped by subsistence farming and clan loyalty. The mountains both isolated the region and protected its traditions. This rough and tough rural mentality extended as far west as northern Texas. Formed by slaveholding elites in the south, the Deep South's flat, humid coastal plains and river deltas were perfect for cotton and sugar plantations. This geography enabled a brutal plantation economy supported by enslavement, which in turn gave it its distinct African American culture today. Its original aristocratic culture, racial caste system, and economic inequality can be traced back to this colonial foundation. Southern Florida and Puerto Rico form the Spanish Caribbean nation. This region is tropical, coastal, and deeply influenced by Caribbean migration and trade, and the Spanish language. Spanish colonial roots, Catholicism, and African Caribbean cultural influences are strong here, especially in cities like Miami and San Juan. This geography makes it the prime gateway between the US and Latin America. New France is tucked geographically at the mouth of the Mississippi, making it unusually small, but united by its French heritage. The Mississippi River and bayous enabled trade and settlement by the French and later Creoles. Because of this historic settlement pattern, Catholicism, language, and cuisine make it distinct from the Deep South. Spanning deserts, mountains, and the fertile valleys from Southern California to Texas and into Southern Colorado is El Norte. Because of its geographic location, the Spanish were actually the first Europeans here, establishing missions, presidios, and ranches long before English settlers arrived on the East Coast. Its borderland identity is shaped by bilingualism, Catholicism, and resilience to an overwhelmingly arid environment. Dominated by the Rocky Mountains, the Great Basin deserts, and Arctic tundras of Alaska, the Far West was the last American region to be settled in large numbers. Its harsh environment required massive government infrastructure, from dams and railroads to military bases and eventual airports, to support human settlements. Even today, it's a land of low population and high federal presence because the federal government actually owns most of its land. The left coast is where rugged mountains meet the mighty Pacific Ocean, and encompass the coastal areas of Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and the Alaskan Panhandle. Settled first by Yankees and later by global immigrants, its culture fuses Eastern reformism with Western libertarianism, and its geography, temperate climate, seismic activity, fertile valleys, and vast forests encouraged experimentation, progressivism, and innovation. And finally, as an isolated volcanic archipelago, Hawaii's geography is unlike any other US region. Settled by Polynesians and later transformed by American missionaries and Asian laborers, its culture reflects Pacific traditions, Asian fusion, and deep ties to the ocean. The island's isolation helped preserve indigenous identity even amid colonization, meaning Hawaiian is a common language to this day. Geography and history is embedded within each nation, and each continues to evolve because of these lines today. The United States has always struggled to define what it is: a melting pot, a patchwork, a union, an experiment. But one thing is increasingly clear: it has never truly been one single nation. It's a federation of cultures, worldviews, and identities that have coexisted, sometimes uneasily, under the same flag. That reality becomes easier to see when you stop thinking in terms of states or party lines and start thinking in terms of deep-rooted cultural regions. Take a look at the way Americans behave politically as an example. National elections often hinge on so-called swing states. But when you zoom in closer, it's the swing regions within those states that actually move the needle. The blue cities of Yankeedom clash with the red rural counties of Greater Appalachia, sometimes within the same state. Southern Florida historically voted nothing like the Florida Panhandle, though that trend has changed recently due to shifting political ideologies of Cuban migrants and a growing retiree population. And far northern California has little in common with Los Angeles. It's this cultural geography that tells the real story. These nations are not based on modern trends or media bubbles. They're grounded in centuries of history, and these differences aren't superficial either. They explain why Americans often seem to be speaking past each other, locked in a cultural Cold War. The fights over guns, healthcare, education, and religion aren't just political, they're geographic. The left coast and the far west may both be part of California, but one is progressive and coastal with a desire to restrict gun rights and advance universal healthcare, while the other is libertarian and inland with a passion for low taxes and less government intervention in their lives. Meanwhile, El Norte sees the border not as a dividing line, but as a zone of shared identity with Mexico, contrasted with Greater Appalachia, which sees the border as something that needs to be hardened and made less permeable. Meanwhile, the Spanish Caribbean, anchored in places like Miami and San Juan, functions with a bilingual, bicultural, Spanish-inspired rhythm distinct from anything in the Deep South or Yankeedom. None of this is just a cultural quirk. It affects the governance of each nation. Trying to craft one-size-fits-all federal policy in a country this fragmented is like trying to sew a quilt from 12 different fabrics using a single thread. You see it in the endless political gridlock, in states suing the federal government over mandates, in regions going their own way on issues like abortion, climate, and immigration. The culture wars aren't a glitch in the system, they're the system playing out across an invisible map that very few people acknowledge. But when you do acknowledge that map, and see the United States as these 12 nations, it explains so much. It explains why San Francisco, California, and Los Angeles, California look and feel so different, or why New Orleans, Louisiana is so different from Mobile, Alabama, despite their geographic proximity. It explains why some states feel like they're being governed by outsiders. It also explains why unity is hard and why division comes so easily. The idea of the United States as a single people has always been more aspiration than reality. What holds the country together isn't shared culture, but shared infrastructure, roads, currency, federal programs, a military. But culturally and politically, the US operates more like a loosely bound confederation, not red and blue, but a mosaic of nations that coexist, cooperate, compete, and sometimes clash. Understanding the country through this lens doesn't solve the problems, but it at least makes them less intimidating. In fact, it offers a way to reframe political conflict not as irrational partisanship, but as the natural friction between fundamentally different regional identities. And so, with all that said, if these nations did actually exist, what would they look like today? Which would be most populous, and which would be the wealthiest? If the United States were to break apart, not just politically, but culturally and geographically, it probably wouldn't fracture into red and blue states. It would likely splinter along the lines of these 12 nations, or something close to it. During that time, some would thrive, others would struggle, and a few would quickly seek alliances with the others to stay afloat. Yankeedom, with a population of nearly 58 million and a median income close to $57,000, would be a powerful nation. It would inherit much of the intellectual, educational, and technological infrastructure of the Northeast and the Great Lakes. With elite universities, corporate headquarters, and deep ties to Canada and Western Europe, Yankeedom would function as a progressive, internationally oriented republic. Yankeedom would find a natural ally in the left coast, a smaller nation in terms of population, but wealthier per capita and similarly forward-thinking in tech, sustainability, and civil liberties. A Yankeedom left coast alliance would be a powerful and progressive counterweight to the other blocs. Greater Appalachia, on the other hand, would be one of the largest nations by population and land, but lower in income and higher in internal division. Culturally rugged and libertarian-leaning, it might resist federal-style unity altogether, opting instead for a loosely aligned federation or even full decentralization. After all, how do you tie Appalachia to Oklahoma and northern Texas? Culturally, it would likely have deep ties to the far west, another vast and sparsely populated nation, and could lead to a rural alliance focused on resource extraction, states' rights, and small government. The Deep South, with 45 million people and a median income below $44,000, would likely emerge as a conservative powerhouse with strong emphasis on tradition, religion, and business-friendly policies. Its historic distrust of centralized government might persist, but its internal cohesion would make it a formidable, independent entity. It would also be the region with the highest African American population, perhaps shifting it politically in ways not expected. It could easily ally itself with Greater Appalachia and parts of the Far West on cultural issues, forming a socially conservative coalition. El Norte would be uniquely positioned. With over 34 million people, a relatively young population, and a bilingual workforce, it could become a bridge not just culturally, but economically, between North and Central America. Its economic strength would come from cross-border trade, agriculture, and a strong labor ethic. El Norte would likely partner with the Spanish-speaking Spanish Caribbean, which includes southern Florida and Puerto Rico. Though separated by geography, their shared language, religion, and cultural foundations could build a pan-Caribbean coalition with strong ties to Latin America and Spain. New Netherlands, anchored by New York City, would be small in size, but a global giant in finance, media, and international diplomacy. With the highest population density, high income, and global reach, it would likely function more like a city-state such as Singapore. It would also have close ties to Yankeedom, though due to its status as a global center for finance and trade, it may wish to remain politically neutral overall. Speaking of smaller nations, Tidewater, with a relatively small and aging population, might find itself squeezed between the ambitions of its neighbors. Historically aristocratic and now a region of retirees, it might depend on alliances with either the Deep South or New Netherlands for economic and political stability. The Midlands, straddling the cultural middle, would face a hard choice. Politically moderate with about 37 million people and middling income, it could swing either way, joining the Yankeedom Left Coast Progressive Coalition or partnering with the Deep South or Greater Appalachia for pragmatic reasons. Its fate might hinge on leadership and external pressure. Of all regions, the Midlands are the most likely to swing between the different nations. New France, with only about 3 million people, might also struggle to see where it fits in. New France would likely align with the Deep South, though culturally it stands apart in language, cuisine, and worldview. Of all nations, New France would leave the biggest question mark for how it would evolve as a nation. Finally, Hawaii would be small, but uniquely positioned geopolitically. Its high income and strong ties to Asia and the Pacific would make it a diplomatic and military keystone in the Pacific. While isolated, it could remain neutral, non-aligned, or form a Pacific alliance with the left coast. In raw numbers, the largest nations by population would be Greater Appalachia, Yankeedom, and the Deep South, while the smallest would be Hawaii, New France, and the Spanish Caribbean. The largest by area size would be the Far West, Greater Appalachia, and Yankeedom, while the smallest would be New Netherlands, Hawaii, and the Spanish Caribbean. The wealthiest per capita would be New Netherlands, Hawaii, and the left coast, while the poorest would be the Spanish Caribbean, the Deep South, and El Norte. Finally, the youngest would be El Norte, New France, and New Netherlands, while the oldest would be Hawaii, Yankeedom, and the Spanish Caribbean. If the United States were to divide, it wouldn't do so evenly. Power would consolidate around urban cores, ports, and cultural hubs, just like it does with every nation. Border regions might become flashpoints or bridges. Long simmering tensions could ignite or be resolved. But what's clear is this: a split United States wouldn't just be 50 smaller pieces. It would more likely become 12 vastly different nations, each with its own priorities, challenges, and sense of identity. And in some ways, it already is. The US is a single country, of course, but culturally, it is broken up into different nations. And honestly, you can say the same for basically every country that exists today. Speaking of different countries, this week I'm exploring the ancient ruins of the Khmer Empire's capital city, Angkor. So if that sounds interesting to you, come join me over on my other channel. I hope you enjoyed learning all about the American nations and my unique spin on it. If you did, maybe you should check out this video all about 15 amazing geography facts of the United States. Thanks for watching. See you next time.